Bruce Willis at 70. When Hollywood's toughest hero faces his hardest battle. What happens when the man who taught a generation what courage looks like can no longer speak for himself? How do we say goodbye to someone who once felt indestructible? And what does strength really mean when the spotlight fades? At 70 years old, Bruce Willis, Hollywood's eternal action hero, is living through a chapter no script could ever prepare him for. For decades, he was the embodiment of resilience. The wisecracking cop who crawled through broken glass. The reluctant hero who never asked for glory. The man who always stood back up, bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. But today, Bruce Willis is fighting a battle that cannot be won with grit, humor, or sheer willpower. This is not the story of an actor stepping away from fame. This is the quiet, heartbreaking farewell of a man whose life was defined by endurance, and whose final act is painfully, universally human. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all is this. What do we owe our heroes when they can no longer perform heroics for us? From a stuttering child to a global icon. Bruce Willis was born on March 19, 1955, in Idar-Oberstein, West Germany, a military town shaped by discipline and transience. His father, David Willis, served as a U.S. soldier, while his mother, Marlene, was a German woman whose strength would quietly shape her son's character. When Bruce was just 2 years old, the family relocated to the United States, settling in Carneys Point, New Jersey, a working-class town where life was practical, demanding, and rarely forgiving. There was no red carpet here. No privilege. No safety net. David worked as a welder and mechanic, his hands permanently marked by labor. Marlene took a job at a local bank, balancing work and family with quiet determination. Together, they raised 4 children with strict values: responsibility, humility, and perseverance. But Bruce's childhood came with a challenge that would shape his entire identity. He stuttered, severely. Every sentence was a gamble. Every classroom interaction a potential humiliation. Every attempt to express himself came with fear. Words, the very tool that would later make him famous, felt like an enemy. How does a child find confidence when his own voice betrays him? How do you build courage when silence feels safer than speech? Bruce retreated inward. But something inside him refused to stay silent forever. When the stage became salvation. The turning point came unexpectedly, almost accidentally. Bruce joined the school drama club. And something extraordinary happened. When he stepped onto the stage, the stutter vanished. The lights. The script. The permission to become someone else. In that space, Bruce wasn't afraid. He wasn't judged. He wasn't struggling. He was free. Why does art sometimes heal what life cannot? Why do certain wounds disappear when we are allowed to tell stories instead of living them? Acting gave Bruce control over language, over rhythm, over emotion. He learned that his voice didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be honest. Confidence followed. By his senior year, Bruce wasn't hiding anymore. He was leading. He became student council president, surprising classmates who once knew him as quiet and withdrawn. Charisma doesn't always announce itself early. Sometimes, it waits for pain to shape it first. Finding his way the hard way. After high school, Bruce didn't take the fast track to fame. There was no immediate success. No agents calling. No promises. Instead, he worked. He guarded a nuclear power plant. He drove factory workers to job sites. He worked briefly as a private investigator, learning to observe people, read rooms, notice silence. Eventually, he enrolled at Montclair State University to study drama. But formal education couldn't contain his restless energy. He left before graduating, drawn by the raw magnetism of New York City. There, he tended bar in Hell's Kitchen, a job that doubled as acting school. He listened. He watched. He learned how people talked when they thought no one was paying attention. How many performances are born in places like bars and backrooms? How many great actors are shaped not in classrooms, but in observation? Auditions came and went. Rejection became routine. But Bruce refused to let go of the one thing that had saved him once already: belief. Moonlighting and the birth of a star. In 1985, the waiting ended. Bruce Willis landed the role of David Addison on Moonlighting, a casting decision that surprised almost everyone. He wasn't the obvious choice. He wasn't polished. He wasn't predictable. But the moment he appeared on screen, audiences felt it. The wit. The charm. The energy that felt effortless but wasn't. His chemistry with Sybil Shepherd crackled. He didn't just deliver lines, he danced with them. The result? An Emmy. A Golden Globe. And instant stardom. Fame arrived quickly. Commercials followed. He became the face of Seagram's wine coolers, earning millions. Then came another quiet but revealing decision. Bruce quit drinking and walked away from the endorsement money. In an industry fueled by excess, what does it say when someone chooses restraint over profit? Was this the first sign that Bruce Willis was always more self-aware than his on-screen persona suggested? Die Hard changed everything. Then came 1988. Die Hard didn't just launch a franchise, it rewrote the rules of action cinema. John McClane wasn't a superhero. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't flawless. He was scared. He got hurt. He complained. He joked through pain. He felt real. Audiences didn't just watch him, they recognized themselves in him. And Bruce Willis became something rare, an action hero who didn't rely on invincibility, but vulnerability. That same year, he demonstrated range, romantic comedy, Blind Date, serious drama, In Country, and later voice acting, Look Who's Talking. He wasn't boxed in. He was building a legacy one risk at a time. Fame, failure, and reinvention. The 1990s tested him. Yes, there were triumphs, Die Hard sequels, Pulp Fiction, where his restrained performance gave the film its emotional spine. But there were also failures. Hudson Hawk. Color of Night. Critics mocked them. Headlines sharpened their knives. How does a star survive public failure in an industry that never forgets? By enduring. Bruce didn't disappear. He adjusted. He learned. He came back. 12 Monkeys proved his depth. The Fifth Element showcased his versatility. Armageddon restored box office dominance. Failure didn't define him. Persistence did. The veteran years, a legend learns to reflect. By the 2000s and 2010s, Bruce Willis became cinema's seasoned warrior. Sin City. Red. Looper. He appeared on Friends, conquered Broadway, survived Comedy Central roasts with self-deprecating humor. Behind the tough exterior was a man increasingly aware of time. A man who understood that fame fades. That bodies age. That legacies are fragile. His career was never about perfection. It was about showing up, again and again. The diagnosis that changed everything. In March 2022, the world learned the truth. Bruce Willis had been diagnosed with aphasia, a neurological disorder that disrupts language. His thoughts were still there. His memories remained. But words began slipping away. Imagine knowing exactly what you want to say, and being unable to reach it. Then, in early 2023, the diagnosis deepened. Frontotemporal dementia, FTD. Unlike Alzheimer's, FTD attacks language, personality, and behavior first. There is no cure. No reversal. Only progression. What happens when the mind that built a lifetime of characters begins to lose access to itself? A family steps forward. Bruce's family didn't hide. They spoke openly, with dignity, honesty, and love. His wife Emma. His former wife Demi Moore. His daughters, standing together, united not by fame, but by care. They reframed the story. This wasn't tragedy. It was humanity. They reminded the world that Bruce wasn't disappearing. He was changing. And in doing so, they changed how the public understood illness, aging, and strength. Redefining strength. Bruce Willis spent decades teaching us what strength looked like. Now, he's teaching us something harder. That strength isn't always loud. That courage doesn't always fight back. That sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do, is accept help. What if this final chapter is not a fall, but a transformation? What if the man who once saved the world on screen is now saving us from our fear of vulnerability? The legacy that remains. Bruce Willis didn't just make movies. He made people feel capable. He made imperfection heroic. He made endurance relatable. At 70, his voice may be quieter, but his impact has never been louder. That line, simple, almost guileless, carries within it a small, stubborn truth. Heroism is not a single costume or crowning moment. Sometimes, it is a series of ordinary decisions made in impossible circumstances. Sometimes, it is a life rearranged so that another can breathe a little easier. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson of all. Heroes don't disappear when the fight changes. They simply teach us a different way to be brave. How will we remember Bruce Willis? Not for what he can no longer do, but for everything he gave us. A family watching him slip away. The house they shared for years had once echoed with the sounds people associate with a life lived loudly. Laughter over late dinners, the clack of keyboard and script pages being torn and smoothed, the tiny footsteps of children racing through corridors. That same house, in the months after diagnosis, learned also the rhythms of a different kind of day. The steady beep of a monitoring device, the quiet footsteps of a nighttime nurse, the soft hum of a thermometer left on a kitchen counter. Emma Hemming Willis remembers those small things with the kind of precision people use to make sense of a world that feels unglued. At first, the changes were easy to explain away. It's the echo of a childhood stutter, she told herself. Late nights, bad takes, stress. But when a phone call went unanswered for hours, when a phrase he'd used 100 times failed to come into focus, she felt the ground shift. There is a special sort of terror that arrives slowly. It is not the cinematic, single-moment shock of a heart attack or an accident. It is incremental, missed words, a look that pauses too long, a name that hovers just out of reach. Those who live beside someone with frontotemporal dementia describe it as watching a familiar house remodel itself from the inside out. Rooms rearranged without warning, doors that used to be open now stubbornly closed. Bruce, in that fragile in-between, exists as both presence and absence. He arrives for short visits, laughing and telling fragments of stories, then drifts into confusion and silence. There are moments of tenderness, his daughters climbing into his lap, the old habit of pretending he can't possibly be serious when they mock his cooking, and there are moments when he seems to be simultaneously here and somewhere else entirely. The family learned to honor both, to sit with the person in front of them and the person they knew before. Emma chose love over despair. She chose structure over chaos. And in 2025, after long conversations and prayerful sleep-deprived nights, she made the decision to place him in a separate care home with 24-hour support. It was an act that would split public opinion in two. Was she giving up or protecting him? Social media amplified every doubt into a chorus. People who had never met the family offered verdicts in the blunt language of comment threads. How could she? Some asked. Why not keep him at home? Others demanded. But for Emma, whose days had become a series of small, exhausting logistics, the choice was a calculus of dignity. Could she keep him safe, comfortable, and, crucially, happy? Could she give their daughters the childhood she believed they deserved, while also honoring the man who had been their father? She explained it plainly when the cameras finally found her willing to speak. Bruce wanted the girls to grow up surrounded by laughter, not constant illness. Can love sometimes mean making impossible choices? The question hung as a challenge, and it reframed the debate for many who had rushed to judgment. The children's silent grief. Children do not grieve finality in neat chapters. They grieve in edits. Missed soccer games that were once sacred, conversations that used to end with, "I'll be right there," and now end with silence. Mabel and Evelyn, still young enough to be shaped by these years, hold a dozen private rituals between them and their father. A favorite cereal spoon reserved for Saturday mornings, a playlist of songs they play when they miss him, small talismans of a family's attempt to stitch life together. They miss the father who remembered their birthdays, who could make a broken toy into a spaceship with nothing but tape and imagination. They miss the man who had once stood at the center of a whirl of attention and yet somehow always found time to be present. Sometimes they watch him across the room and see the shape of a man, the outline of memories, and then realize he does not remember the punchline to the joke they've waited to tell him all day. How do you explain to a child that the person who taught them bravery now needs to be taught how to eat? Emma worries, the kind of worry that keeps one awake, about how this will shape them. Will they carry a reluctance to love fully, for fear of loss? Will they learn to be caretakers, to sacrifice their own needs repeatedly? Or will they, instead, inherit a different kind of courage, the capacity to stay when staying is hard, to hold a hand without expectation of reciprocal memory? In July 2025, overwhelmed by speculation, Emma asked the world to stop judging what they didn't understand. Behind the headlines, she said, is a family learning how to say goodbye one day at a time. That sentence, one day at a time, is the most radical kind of optimism available to people in terrible, long declines. It acknowledges the slow erosion without losing the insistence that each day, each small joy, still matters. Demi Moore and a family united. The narrative of Hollywood often insists on clean, sensational divides, exes as enemies, blended families as awkward footnotes, but life rarely conforms to such tidy structures. Demi Moore, Bruce's ex-wife, refused to vanish into a backstory. She remained present. She appeared at holidays, at birthdays, in quiet photographs on social posts where a trio of adults smiled tiredly around a candlelit cake. When Bruce turned 70, the blended family gathered as if to make a small, stubborn statement. Despite public narratives, this was still a family. Love, here, is not a single emotion but a muscle. It is practiced in small, repeated actions. A familiar face holding his hand during a medical check, an ex-wife bringing a casserole she knows he likes, daughters and stepdaughters trading jokes to draw a grin. Memory may fade, but the affection that shaped shared years does not disappear. Isn't that worth remembering? The films that hid the truth. Between 2018 and 2022, Bruce's name appeared across more than 20 low-budget productions. At the time, fans asked why an actor of his caliber would appear in so many forgettable films. The answer, in later interviews with crew and friends, was more unsettling. On set, he struggled. He sometimes needed an earpiece to hear lines fed to him, sometimes waited too long for the next cue, sometimes froze under lights he had once owned. During the 2020 production of Hard Kill, a prop gun was misfired, twice. The crew adjusted scenes, altered angles, reworked dialogue, and, in private, asked themselves where responsibility lay. "We were making him look good," one insider would later say. He was being puppet. The image that lingers is messy. A man whose legend allowed productions to keep him on stage even when the mechanics of acting required cognitive reliability. Why did it continue? In a business where name recognition sells distribution deals, where a recognizable face can secure financing and streaming placements, the temptation to prioritize profit over welfare is real. That those decisions happened is not a moral abstraction but a practical one. Someone signed the contracts, someone answered the phone, someone decided the optics were manageable. Some directors, when they understood the risks, refused to cast him again. The calculus had shifted. The moral cost outweighed the profit. For others, the answer was pragmatic. They retooled films to make him comfortable, to reduce speaking parts, to frame him lovingly while minimizing the chances he would be exposed to harm. What does that do to our perception of stardom? Do we, as an audience, owe a duty to expect humane practices behind the camera? These are uncomfortable questions, because they force us to reconcile our love for a performance with the cost of producing it. A disease still largely unknown. Frontotemporal dementia is one of those medical terms people nod at, then quickly move on from. It often strikes younger than other dementias, attacks the frontal and temporal lobes that govern language, behavior, and personality, and progresses unpredictably. For families who live through it, the unpredictability is a form of cruelty. A day of lucidity can follow a week of confusion. Research has been limited, funding patchy, and public awareness spotty compared with more widely known conditions. Too late for Bruce, perhaps. But perhaps not for a generation of children, siblings, partners, and friends who will face similar diagnoses. What responsibility do we have, as a public, to fund research? How do we turn our admiration for a celebrity into activism for a condition that affects thousands quietly, in hospital rooms and living rooms? What remains? Today, Bruce is described as stable. That word comforts and hurts at once. Stable, in the clinical sense, often signals that no rapid decline is visible, a plateau. But a plateau in a degenerative disease is still a plateau. It is not recovery. It is a place where life becomes a litany of careful routines and cautious celebrations. This is not a story of abandonment. It is a story of endurance, of a man who once ran toward explosions on screen and now relies on others to navigate daily life. It is a reminder that the bodies of our heroes, like ours, are mortal. Scenes and questions. Picture this, a hospital garden on a late summer afternoon, sunlight catching the dust in slow motion, a wooden bench warmed by the day. Bruce, a man whose films often put him in motion, sits, looking not at the camera but at the way green leaves tremble. Mabel traces the veins of a leaf with her finger, teaching him how the world's small details can be anchors. Evelyn hums a melody that used to make him laugh. Emma watches, her face caught between the gratitude for the moment and the ache of what has been lost. Why do some of us find such solace in the small moments? Is it because they are the last things left holy to us, unstealable by the disease? Or because they make grief bearable by holding joy like a buoy in stormy water? Another memory. A production office where producers argue over insurance clauses while an assistant leafs through annotated scripts with a trembling hand. In the side room, a dialect coach rehearses lines with an earpiece, trying to shape a scene that will look effortless on screen. The moral dilemma is palpable. Preserve the sensation of continuity for the audience, or protect the actor's dignity by stepping away. There are no easy answers. What responsibility do colleagues and the industry hold when talent falters? How do we make workplaces safe for those whose minds begin to betray them? The final lesson. Bruce taught us, across decades of films, what heroism looked like on screen. He taught us about resilience in action sequences and about charm in quiet monologues. He gave us characters who chose, against the odds, to do the right thing. Now, in a quieter role, he teaches us something deeper, that courage isn't always loud, that strength can be quiet, and that love sometimes means holding on even as everything slips away. This is perhaps the most difficult lesson for a culture that consumes tidal narratives of victory and loss like news bullets. True bravery is sometimes a domestic art. It shows up in folded sweaters, in booked appointments, in conversations where no one will be watching. It shows up in the decision to let a professional caregiver take over for a night so a wife can sleep. It shows up when an ex-wife returns with a warm pie and stays to help. As fans, we can honor him not just by watching his films, those iconic scenes where he ran toward danger rather than away, but by supporting brain health research, by demanding compassion in Hollywood practices, and by recognizing the humanity behind fame. There are practical steps to take. Donate to research foundations, lobby for better workplace protections for aging and cognitively impaired performers, educate ourselves about dementia's many faces. But there are also quieter ways of honoring him, carrying forward the small courtesies of patience and respect in our own lives. How will you remember him? Will it be the wisecracks, the daring escapes, the way he could look both weary and invincible in the same frame? Or will it be the image of a family gathered around a small cake, voices low, laughing at an old joke that lands like a memory? I suspect the answer will be both, because human memory is rarely neat. It is a small, ordinary miracle. Recognition does not need to arrive in grand epiphanies. Sometimes it is a look, a shape, a music box lullaby that stirs a remembered scent. The family leans into these small mercies. They keep telling stories, sometimes the same ones, again and again, because stories are how we keep people alive between the moments they forget. What if this is, in the end, the real legacy? Not one highlight reel, but a lattice of moments, a battle to fund research, an industry forced to re-evaluate its ethics, a family that modeled patient love. We will remember the movies. We will remember the stunts. But perhaps we will also remember a quieter narrative, a household that taught us to care differently, a public conversation nudged toward compassion. And that may be his most powerful legacy of all.